Hi, my name's Nick from Portainer, and this is Kubernetes the easy way using Portainer. So let's just have a quick look at our agenda and what we're going to cover in this video. So our agenda for today is we're going to be deploying Portainer on a standalone management server. We're going to then configure Portainer to authenticate users against GitHub. So we're going to be using GitHub as our authentication method for logging into Portainer. We're going to then use Portainer itself to create a 3-node MicroK8s cluster. Now these nodes will be virtual machines. We're going to then provision the cluster, configure it, modify the cluster components, and then we're also going to upgrade the Kubernetes version within Portainer. And then we're going to triage the cluster. We're going to be able to go in there, show you how we can SSH into it. We can look at the nodes and their CPU usage and their resource usage and all of that good stuff. We're going to then scale the cluster out. We're going to add an additional node. And then we're going to secure the cluster with OPA Gatekeeper. And on the right hand side, once we've done that and we've got our MicroK8s cluster all set up, we're going to then set up a 3-nodes Kubernetes cluster in Civo. So this is a Kubernetes as a service, and we're going to be able to reach out to that service via an API key, and we're going to be able to provision a cluster there, all just within the Portainer interface, which is awesome. Then we're going to just come back to the user management side of things. We're going to assign users to the cluster, assign the users roles. We're going to configure both clusters with a GitOps pipeline, and we're going to deploy a sample app. And then once that's all done, we're going to access it via Portainer Kube Proxy. So let's get into it. So the first thing that we're going to want to do is deploy Portainer, okay? And you can see here we've got some steps. We're going to install Docker. This is a purely blank virtual machine that I'm going to be using. So yeah, we're going to install Docker, and then we're going to deploy the Portainer Business Edition. We've got the command here, and then we've supplied a license key for the Business Edition, and that will be able to get us started. So let's get into it. So this is my host machine that I'm going to be using, and this is what's going to be running the Portainer server. So the first thing we need to do is actually install Docker. I don't have anything like that running at the moment, so let's grab that command that is in the guide, and we can paste it into our terminal. And then all we have to do is hit enter. And I need to put my password in. Hit enter. And now we just sit back and we'll let that script install Docker for us. And just like that, we now have Docker installed, which is awesome. So we can just do a sudo Docker and hit enter, and you can see that we've got all the commands that have come up. We can clear our terminal, make it a bit more tidy. And now what we need to do is actually deploy Portainer itself. And again, that command has been supplied. So I can just copy that and come here. I'm going to put sudo in here and paste that in. And what we're doing here is, again, we're deploying the Portainer server, and this is ready to go. We can hit enter, and this is going to pull down that Portainer image for us and stand up the Portainer container. Just like that, we have our container running, and we can verify this. So just do a docker ps, and we can see our Portainer container is all up and running. So we should now be able to connect to our Portainer server instance and continue from there. So what we'll want to do is we just want to grab the IP address of our host machine so we can actually connect to that. So where is it? There it is. So that's my IP address there. So I'm going to copy that one there, and I'm just going to put that into a browser and connect. So what we're going to want to do is we're going to paste that in there. We want to make sure that we're connecting over HTTPS, and the port that we're accessing is 9443, and we can hit enter. And this is fine. So we can see here that this connection is not private. That's fine. I'm using Safari, so I can click show details, and then I can just click visit this website. I can zoom in just to make it a bit easier to see. And now we're in the initial admin creation page. So we need to set up our admin account. So we're just going to set up a password here. And I can hit create user. And since we are using the business edition, we're going to need to supply that license, but again, that's been provided. So I can just copy that, copy, come here, paste, and then hit submit. And now you can see we are in Portainer, and just like that, we have our server up and running, which is awesome. So now heading back to our documentation. So you can see we've already completed this. It was that easy. We've deployed the Portainer server. So we've installed Docker, we've got the container up and running, and we've added the license. So let's come down to our next steps. So now we are going to focus on user authentication. So this is where the GitHub side of things comes in. So what we're going to want to do here is configure GitHub to allow Portainer to authenticate users via OAuth, okay? And this is really easy to do. So all we need to do is log into our GitHub account and then go into developer settings, create an OAuth application for our Portainer instance. So I'm going to guide you through all of that. So let's go back to our GitHub. So this is my GitHub page. And what we're going to do here is we are going to go into the top right hand corner where my picture is. And under settings on the right hand side here, we're going to click settings. I'll zoom in a bit so you can see. And if we just scroll right down to the bottom, you see on the bottom left hand side here, it says developer settings. That's where we want to go. So we'll click developer settings. And you can see we've got three options: GitHub apps, OAuth apps, and personal access tokens. We're just going to focus on the OAuth apps. So click there. And I don't have any, so we're going to register a new application. So let's click there. And now we need to give this a name. So you want to give this a name that actually reflects its purpose. So this here will be my Portainer auth. Okay. And then the homepage URL is the IP address plus the port of Portainer and how we've accessed it. Okay. So we can just, the URL, the IP address that you use to access your Portainer server is what you'll put here. So I can just quickly go grab mine. There it is there. Copy that, paste that in just like that, get rid of the little bit on the end there. And same for the callback URL, be the exact same. We can scroll down and hit register application. And there we go. So we've set up our app, our OAuth app now. So there's two key components that Portainer needs. It needs the client ID, and then it also needs the client secret. So if we go back to Portainer now, and then under settings, and then authentication, we're going to see that we have a few options here now. So what we're going to want to do is we are going to want to set up OAuth and make sure that we have automatic user provisioning enabled. So we'll click that. And we can see as a provider under OAuth, there's a few providers that we can select, and we are going to use GitHub for this option. And you can see all it needs is the client ID and the client secret. So let's go back to GitHub and grab those two. So here's the client ID. We'll copy that. Come down here, paste that in. Now we need to generate a client secret. So let's do that as well. So generate new client secret. I'll click that. And I have two-factor authentication, so I need to put that in. So I'll quickly do that. Right, so there we go. I've just added in my two-factor authentication, which has now then allowed me to create that client secret. So I'll just copy that, and we just go back to Portainer again, and we can supply that secret. So I'll paste that in there, and I can hit Save Settings. So before I hit Save Settings, we can just come back to the documentation and just make sure that we've followed all the steps. So here you can see that again, we've gone under the developer settings, we've created our OAuth application for our Portainer instance, okay? And then in Portainer, we've selected settings, we've gone to authentication, we've selected the OAuth and then GitHub, and then we've grabbed the client ID as well as the secret. We've turned on auto provisioning of users. So all we have to do now is save, and then we should be able to log in as our GitHub user. So let's hit Save Settings. And there we go, that's all set up now. So if we log out, we can now see that we have the option to log in with GitHub. So if I click here, now I can enter in my username and password. So let me just quickly do that. Right, so I've entered that in, and now it's saying, do I want to authorize Portainer auth, which I do, so I can hit authorize Nick Portainer, so that's me, and click there. Now we've been redirected, and we have now logged in to our environment using our GitHub account. That's awesome. And we can see we can't see anything because our user doesn't actually have any permissions within inside of our Portainer environment yet, but that's fine. We're going to configure that later. So what we can do is we can actually just log back out. Yep, sign out. Then heading back to our Portainer environment, we can just use our internal authentication. So that, and with our admin account. There we go. So we're back in. Right, so we've completed these steps now. So if we just come down to the next stage, we are now at the MicroK8s deployment phase. And this is where stuff gets very fun and exciting. So let's just come down here. And so what we're going to do now is that we are going to provision a MicroK8s cluster with our virtual machines that we have up and running. And keep in mind, these virtual machines are just running Ubuntu and nothing else. They're pretty much stock standard. So we're going to show you how powerful Portainer is with configuring MicroK8s just with So we're going to show you how powerful Portainer is with configuring MicroK8s and setting up your cluster. And all we need to do is provide us some SSH credentials and it will handle the rest for us. So as you can see here, we'll just read the steps before we go through with it. We can, as the admin, we'll select environments, add an environment, create a Kubernetes cluster. We're going to add our SSH credentials for our assigned MicroK8s VMs. So in my case, all my virtual machines use the same SSH credentials. I'm not using keys or anything like that, just username and password for this example. We're going to be deploying Kubernetes 1.27. We're going to add two add-ons, which is the metrics and ingress. Okay, so let's get that all set up. Great, so we're back in Portainer. Let me just make this a bit bigger for you. We'll click environments and we'll hit add environment. You can see here we've got a few options. The only one we're going to focus on at this section here is create a Kubernetes cluster. So let's click that and hit start wizard. And you can see here that we have MicroK8 selected, which is awesome. That's what we're going to be deploying. And we're going to have to set up some credentials first. So the credentials that we're going to use for our cluster, the SSH credentials to be able to get into the virtual machines to do all the configuration for us. So I'm going to just call this Kate's Made Easy. That's going to be the credentials name. And the username that I use for my SSH is just Nick. And then I'll put in my password here. And I'm not using SSH key authentication, so I'm going to turn that off. If you are using SSH key authentication, that's where you would enable it and then you'd supply all of that. But again, for this video and for this guide, we're just going to be using the username and password. And then we can click add credentials. Nice, there we go. So now we've supplied our credentials, you can actually see our credentials here, right? So it knows to use that username and password for this deployment. So now under the name, we can supply a name for our deployment. Again, I'm just going to call this Kate's Made Easy. And now we are in a section here where we need to supply our IP addresses of our nodes. So let's just go back to our documentation. And you can see in the image here, in the example, we are supplying 3 IP addresses in the control plane nodes section. So we're going to set up our control plane nodes. And out of the 4 virtual machines that we're using, 3 of them will be the control plane nodes, okay? So I'm going to grab my IP addresses and I'm going to paste them into this section. So there's 1, 2, and 3. So these are my control plane nodes. So if we just scroll down here, we can hit test connections. And there we go. We can confirm that 3 out of 3 nodes are reachable, okay? Which is great. We want to make sure, of course, that these can be reached before we actually go ahead and try and deploy these. And for this example, remember, we are going to be deploying 1.27 stable because then at a later date, we're going to upgrade to 1.28, right? And we need to add 2 add-ons. And those add-ons were, if we come back, we are going to add metrics and ingress, okay? So let's add those two. So add-on, you can see here we have all the bunch of add-ons that you can select. So there's ingress, so we'll add that one, and then another one. We'll come down here and we'll add metrics. If I zoom out a little bit, you can see that. So we've added those two add-ons now. So confirming, we've got the 3 IP addresses there. We're using our credentials. We've got the name. All looks really good. And we, again, 1.27 stable. Make sure we're on that. Ingress and metric server. We can hit provision environment. So let's provision our environment. You can see in the top right hand corner there, it says Kate's installation has started. So what we can actually do is close outer here. And we can see it's now creating our MicroK8s cluster. So it's going out to those 3 virtual machines and it's provisioning MicroK8s for us. All we have to do now is sit back and wait. So we can see that the status has actually changed. So it's changed from creating to now it's updating the environment. So again, the progress and the updates are just coming through as we're just staying on this page. So we can just leave it up and it will just update it as it goes through. And there we go. We can see we have a URL now and our environment has been stood up. So before we progress anymore, let's go back to our documentation and just see what we're doing next. So you can see here, what we've done is we have deployed our Kubernetes cluster now. We supplied it the credentials and everything was okay. We deployed the 1.27 and we added the metrics and ingress. So let's just go down to the next section. And we waited, and yes, it did. It only took about 5 minutes and we now have our environment all set up. So if we come down here, we can see the next steps that we need to do. So we're going to manage the environment. We're going to click on the cluster and then set up. And then we're going to enable the metrics server, right? And then we're going to disable the resource overcommit, disable use of the default namespace, and then just noting that there are no storage classes available. Okay, so let's go back to our Portainer and let's go and ahead with these steps. So if we click on the homepage of Portainer, there's our beautiful Kubernetes environment all set up with our 3 nodes. Okay, that's awesome. We're very easy. We just waited for it to configure and we have our environment set up. So if we click into here, and like the guide was saying, all we need to do is click on cluster. And here we get a beautiful overview of our environment, of our Kubernetes environment. Then we need to come under setup. And in setup, we need to enable the metric server. So if we just come down, you can see that enable features using the metrics API is already enabled. So that's great. What we need to also do is restrict access to the default namespace as it was specified in our documentation. And where it says allow resource overcommit, we need to disable that, right? So, and then what we'll do, we'll change that to 10%, okay? So once you've done that, so we've restricted access to the default namespace, okay? We've turned off allow resource overcommit, and we've just confirmed that our metrics API is enabled, okay? And once we've done that, we can hit save configuration. And there we go. We've just updated those settings for our cluster, just like that, very easy. And then jumping back to our documentation, we can see that we're going to now modify the cluster. So we're going to navigate back to the cluster page and add host path storage and apply the change, okay? Then navigate back to the cluster setup and we'll see that we can then disallow the use of host path, okay? So let's go back and add a new add-on to our running MicroK8s cluster and then we can configure it, all via Portainer. So cluster, and where the add-ons are, if we click add-on, add add-on, and we're looking for host path storage, okay? So let's click that and apply changes and hit update. And this is going to enable that add-on for our cluster. So we can see at the top here, it says updating add-ons. And here we go. Before I could even really show it, it's already enabled that metrics, the host path storage. So now we can actually configure this. So if we go back up to setup, and if we scroll down, we can now see that we have the settings for that add-on we just enabled. So we can actually enable this now. So if I click MicroK8s host path for the storage, it's now been enabled, and we can save that configuration. So we can click save. Just like that, the add-on was enabled, and then we could also configure that add-on as well, all via the cluster setup page. Now back at our documentation, we've already completed all of this, which is awesome. And if we just go down, we can see now we can upgrade the cluster. Again, all being managed via the Portainer interface here. So we can do this via the cluster page within inside of Portainer. So if we click on cluster here on the left-hand side, again, we can see all of our resources for our cluster, how it's going. It seems pretty good at the moment. And if we come down to Kubernetes version, we can see that we are on 1.27 stable, but Portainer is saying to us, hey, there's a new version. Would you like to upgrade to 1.28 stable? Yes, we do. That would be awesome. And all we have to do is click, and it's going to ask us, are you sure you would like to upgrade your cluster? And we can click confirm. And there we go. Portainer is going to handle it for us. It's going to update our cluster to 1.28 from 1.27. So like when we're deploying our cluster, it's just a matter of sitting back and waiting. You can also see here it's giving status updates on what steps it's actually doing during the upgrade. So you can see it was draining before, now it's checking the status, and now it's going through each one of the nodes and it's upgrading the version. So we can see exactly what it's doing as well. And there we go. So now you can see that our MicroK8s cluster has been upgraded. So we can see it now says 1.28 stable, and there is no upgrade currently available. So just looking at our documentation here, we can see, yep, click update to 1.28 stable, which has gone through successfully, which is awesome. So now we can progress to the next step. So the next step, we can actually see here that if we go into the cluster page, we can actually see some actions. And this is where we can see the metrics of the nodes, we can inspect it, and also SSH into the node all via Portainer. And I'll show you this now. So on the cluster page, so I haven't changed from the page where we were when we upgraded our cluster. If I just scroll down, you can see our nodes here at the bottom. And just to move my camera out of the way, on the bottom here, let me try to zoom in a little bit. You can see actions, and under actions we have stats, and then we have the MicroK8 status, and then also the SSH console. So let's just jump into each one of these. So we can click stats of this node. Zoom out a little bit. So remember, everything has kind of just come up again. So the data here is going to be a little bit, is all going to be all new, but we can see here straight away from the first time snippet, we can see that we've been using 1.3 gigabytes of memory on this one here, and then for the CPU usage, we're looking at around just 8%. And then over time, this will just progress through as it updates. And then if I go back, we can then click on, scroll down, and then we can click on this one here, which is the MicroK8 status. And here we can just get a good overview of that it's running, what add-ons have been enabled. So this is just a really nice high overview. And we can also see what master nodes are on here as well and the IP addresses of them. So that's real easy information to get. And then lastly, if you want, you can SSH into your node of choice. So clicking on there, we will open up a SSH console for you, just like that. So back at our documentation, you've seen the action. So if you even need to, for whatever reason, go in there and look at the metrics, the SSH into it, we provide you a really easy way of being able to do that with any one of your nodes. So if we scroll down to the next step, so this is what we're going to be doing now, is that we are now going to be expanding our cluster. We're going to be adding an additional node, and this one will be a worker node this time. And I'm going to show you exactly how you can do this. So back into our node section, you can see at the top, this one here where my mouse is, where it says add nodes, we can click there. And then rather in the control plane nodes box, which is the top one here, we're actually going to add an IP address in the worker nodes. So I'm going to grab the IP address of my 4th VM and I'm going to paste it in here. So there we go, I've pasted that in and we can hit test connections like we did last time, and we've confirmed Portainer can hit that server. Awesome. And since this is all part of the same cluster, the SSH keys that we're using are going to be the same. So, and the SSH credentials I have confirmed are the same for this 4th virtual machine as well. So I know that the connection is going to be fine, and I can hit add nodes. And now you can see it's scaling our cluster to add that 4th node, which is now a worker node. So it's going to install MicroK8s on there, it's going to manage it, and it's going to add it to the cluster for us. So all we have to do, again, is sit back and wait. And there we go. So it's all finished now, and what we can do is we can scroll down. Bam. There is our 4th node. You can see it's not quite ready yet. It's still starting up, but if we give it a bit of a refresh, no doubt that node will be all up and running. So we come back down, we can see that our worker is now ready. How awesome is that? Just like that. So whenever you want to add more workers or more control plane nodes, all you need to do is just add a node, supply the IP address, providing the SSH credentials are all the same, and bam, you just scaled out your cluster. It's awesome. So jumping back to our documentation, we have expanded the cluster just like that. Add an IP address, click a button, wait, well done, you scaled it out. Awesome stuff. So let's just scroll down to the next step. So now the last part of our MicroK8s steps here is we're just going to secure the cluster. So we're going to show you how you can actually secure and add some constraints and enable them all via the Portainer interface. So if we go back to our cluster page where we've been, and then we click on the security constraints, we can enable the security, and then we can choose constraints to enable for our cluster. So here I am back on that same page where I was before, but you'll see on the left-hand side, security constraints. So let's click security constraints. And at the moment, it's not enabled. That's fine. All we need to do is click. There we go. We've enabled security constraints on our cluster. And you can actually have a look here and you can see all the constraints that are available that you can enable if you would like. So for this example, I'm probably just going to restrict running privileged containers. So let's click that. And feel free to have a play around, look at all the constraint options that are here. So you can see the one that I've just enabled is controls whether any container in a pod can enable privileged mode. I don't necessarily want that, so I'm going to add that as a constraint. So enabled, and I can hit save settings. So hit save settings, and that's going to add those constraints for us. So we just sit back and wait. And there you go. At the top right, it says success, constraint settings successfully saved. So looking at our documentation, so our cluster is now secured with an OPA Gatekeeper and an OPA policy, right? So if we look at the images here, we can see some of the things that have been enabled. And if we actually go to our applications, and then there should be a Gatekeeper system namespace. So we can actually confirm this. So in Portainer, if we hit applications, under the namespaces, we can see Gatekeeper system. If we click there, we can see that these applications are now running under the Gatekeeper system namespace within our cluster, and that's all being deployed and managed for us just via our deployment here in the Portainer interface. Which then brings us to the Cevo CaaC deployment. So let's get into it. So let's go down to our first steps. So it says here, as the admin, select environments, add an environment, provision a Kubernetes cluster, and then we'll get a choice, and then we're going to select Cevo here. And then using the API key that we already have, we can then define and deploy our 3-node cluster, all via Portainer. This is really cool stuff, so let's get right into it. So I'm in my Portainer environment, and what we're going to do, I'll just go back to the home screen. Then on the left-hand side here, we have environments, like where we went before to deploy our Kubernetes, our MicroK8s environment. On the top right, I'll click Add Environment. And then rather than create a Kubernetes cluster, we're now going to provision a KaaS cluster, okay? So what we can do, and as if you're curious on what that means, it's Kubernetes as a service. And we can click there. We'll hit Start Wizard. And you can see the selection that you can actually use for deploying a KaaS service. So we're just going to use Civo here. So we can leave that clicked. And then we'll have to set a credentials name. Exactly the same as how we set up the credentials for the MicroK8s. It's just so you can, when you look at your credentials, you know what's what, right? Because you can have many environments in a specific cloud environment or a local environment or whatever. It's just, yeah, it's good to give these names something that means something. So I'll go Civo K8s easy. So for my name, I'm just going to go Civo, no, not Chow, K8s easy. There we go. And the API key for our Civo environment, I'll just quickly grab that. Copy that and paste. There we go. So now I can add the credentials. Add credentials, top right hand corner, created successfully. That's awesome. So now Portainer's just going to check that and we'll just wait for that to come back successfully. So then we can actually create our Civo cluster. Awesome. So we've gotten our panel here now, so we can start to fill out what we want for our cluster. So for the name, let's just call this Civo. Perfect. And then for the credentials, we're using the Civo K8s easy, which is what I just set up before. We'll leave the region as New York, but you can see here we have a few other options. New York's fine for this example. So for this one here, we will do a standard medium. So let's click standard medium. And then node count. So we will leave this as 3, which is fine. And then the network ID we'll leave as default. And then the Kubernetes version we'll leave as 1.270. Okay? So just coming back to our documentation, we can see here, again, we'll just kind of zoom into the screenshots here. And we can see that the region was New York in the example here, standard, node count 3, and we're just going to leave everything as default. So what we're deploying matches these screenshot examples as well. Great. So what we can do now is we can hit provision environment. And this is reaching out to a whole nother cloud service, and it's going to deploy all of this for us all via the Portainer environment. So let's hit provision environment. And it says the cluster provisioning has started, similar to the MicroK8s one. And now we just sit back. And it's saying creating the KaaS cluster. So we'll just wait for it to do its thing. Now, if you're curious, just while this is loading, you can see in Civo that everything's kicking off. We haven't had to log in here. I just needed that API key, but just purely so you can see what's actually happening in the background. You can see it's spinning up these nodes now, and it's doing everything we requested within Portainer is being done here. Again, we didn't need to log in here. We can go back to Portainer, but I just wanted to show you that everything is being created here as well. So back in Portainer now, we'll just wait for it to finish its job. So now you can see that Portainer is just waiting for the agent's response. That's currently in Civo, and then once Civo goes, yep, I'm all up and ready to go, Portainer is going to go, great, and then that environment's going to stand up. So we'll just wait for that response. And now it's updating the environment. And there we go. Our Civo environment is now up and running, and we should be able to see it. So if I come up into home in the top left, bam, there it is. So we have our local environment, which is just our Portainer server. We have our MicroK8s environment, and now we have our Civo environment as well. And all of that was done just by using that API key. We didn't need to go into Civo or anything like that. It was all configured and managed via our Portainer environment here. Let's head back to our documentation, and let's see what's next. So we've done this step, we've defined our 3-node cluster, and it's all been deployed. So what's next? Waited for it. Again, this took around 5 minutes. Perfect, no problems at all. So now we're going to configure the cluster. Again, exactly kind of like what we've done with our MicroK8s cluster. So we're going to go into our environment, click on the cluster, then setup. But in this case, we're going to enable the use of a load balancer, disable resource overcommit like we've done before, disable the use of the default namespace, and enable use of Civo storage. Okay, so let's go do that. So here's our environments. I'm going to click on our Civo, which is the one at the bottom, cluster. Wait for that page to load. And here you can see our 3 nodes, which is awesome. And then if we go into our setup, you can see we are now in that similar page, but at the top here, we can go allow users to use external load balancer. So we're going to tick that. Perfect, that's on. We're going to disable resource overcommit. Scroll down. So that's on, but we want it off. Again, let's change that to 10. Perfect. And you'll see here, if we try to enable the metrics API, see how it turns itself off. Now the documentation calls out specifically. So let me just read that out for you. So you can see here, note, the metrics cannot be enabled as it's not installed by default with Civo, okay? So if you're wondering why you can't enable those metrics, that's why. So we've enabled the load balancer, we've disabled the resource overcommit, but we still need to disable the use of default namespace and enable the use of Civo storage. So let's finish up. So load balancer has been enabled. We've turned off resource overcommit. The Civo storage is on. And we just need to restrict access to the default namespace. There we go. So we're all happy with that. So now we can save our configuration. And we'll just wait for that to save and give us the little green tick, which it's done. Awesome. So we'll just wait for that. And there we go. So that has all been enabled. So now let's go back to our documentation. Perfect. So confirming load balancer, yes. Disable resource overcommit, yes. Disable the default namespace, yes. And the use of the Civo storage is ticked as well. Awesome. And we have noted that we couldn't enable the metrics. We're all happy here. Next. So we're assigning user to clusters with RBAC. So do you remember how we tried to log in with our GitHub account and we see nothing? This is where we've resolved that. So let's scroll down. So what we're going to want to do here is click on environments, click on manage access for the MicroK8s cluster, and then we're going to select our GitHub user and assign a role, use environment administrator for this cluster, right? Just noting that in a production environment, you would use teams and then you would allocate a team to a resource. But in this case, we just have the one user. So we're just going to use user to role in this scenario. So let's go to our environments, our MicroK8s, and assign our GitHub user environment admin for the cluster. So we're on the home page. So on the left-hand side here, we're going to click environments. And you can see our 3 environments here. So K8s Made Easy is my MicroK8s environment. So let's click Manage Access. And if we scroll down here, we can select users and or teams. So Nick Portainer is my GitHub user. Okay, so we're going to click on that. There we go. And environment administrator. Let's just click open. I just want to show you some roles. So there's a bunch of other roles you can use. But again, environment administrator is what we're going to use for this one. Click that. And click Create Access. Bam, there we go. We've just given RBAC permissions for a user for our cluster. Back at our documentation, we have just completed this section here. Great, let's see what's next. So now we're going to click on environments again, but this time we're going to be managing access for our Civo cluster. So we're going to select our same GitHub user we just used. Again, we would use teams normally, but we're just using an individual user here. But this time we're going to give them a standard user for this cluster, okay? So let's go do that now. So back to environments, and then for Civo, manage access, and then come down here, select our user, Nick Portainer, great. But this time, standard user. And let's hit create access. It's that easy. There we go, access has been successfully updated. Awesome. Next step. So, we've just completed that one. So, assign GitHub, we're still in the assign GitHub user section, but it's saying log out as the admin and log in using your OAuth. So, we're going to log in as our GitHub user and we'll see what access we have, right? So, we should see the 2 clusters, but we shouldn't see the Portainer management server. Okay, we should only see the 2 that we've been given access to. So, let's go have a look. So, admin, log out, log in with GitHub. I should already be authenticated. No, I'm not. That's fine. So let me just quickly put in my username and password. Signing in. I have to do my two-factor authentication, so let me quickly put that in. Great. So it's going to ask me to add a passkey. In this case, I'm just going to go ask me later. So click that, and now it should log me into Portainer with my GitHub account. Let's zoom in a bit. Bam. We can see our 2 environments. Fantastic. Let's go back to the documentation. So we've confirmed that we can only see the 2 clusters and not the Portainer management server. So we've configured our access correctly. Awesome. Let's go to the next step. Now permissions. So see your user has full access to the MicroK8s. We gave it environment admin, but no access to Civo. We disabled access to default namespace and the user has not been granted access to any other namespaces, okay? So let's go have a look. We'll compare the 2, okay? So we'll go into the MicroK8s, then we'll go into Civo, and we'll just have a look. So first off, let's go into our MicroK8s, right? Let's click in namespaces, and we can see that we have 3 namespaces, default, ingress, and the gatekeeper system, right? Awesome. And if we come into applications, we can see our namespaces at the top and we can click into them and see what's going on. Now let's go back to home, go into our Civo. We'll click on that one. Great. And now what we can do is if we go into namespaces, we can't see anything, right? Because we've got limited access here. We go into applications, and we try to look at the namespaces, again, we can't see anything. So all of this shows you, so our MicroK8s had environment admin, can do whatever it wants. Standard user, a lot more limited, so that's a good view of how we can restrict access depending on the user's needs. And which is exactly what the documentation was referring to as well, which is awesome. So now what we can do is go to the next step. And now we're going to log back into our admin. Right? And then we're going to manage the Civo environment, click on namespaces and select manage access. And we're going to grant our GitHub user access to just the default namespace, okay? So let's go ahead and do that. So we'll log out as the GitHub user, log out, sign out. We're going to use our internal auth, username, admin, put in my super secret password. There we go. So I'm all logged in. So going into Civo, going into namespaces. Remember, we couldn't see anything before when we were on our standard user. And here's default. Now, if we click manage access, we can now add our user. So let's just double check the documentation in this section. So you can see here on the image below, what we're doing is we're just adding our GitHub user as a standard user, right? We're adding that user that already has the standard user permissions access to a specific resource, okay? Because by default, it doesn't have access to these resources. We need to assign it to the resources we want that user to have access to. So let's go back. Great. And select, here we go, create access. So now we've said, hey, look, you're a standard user in this environment. I'm going to say what you can and can't access. And now we've just decided you can access that default namespace. That's essentially what we've just done. right? And then now we match the documentation. So next step. Now we're going to log out as the admin again, and we're going to log back in as our GitHub user, connect to the Servo cluster, and we should see if we can see that default namespace. We've been given access. Now we're telling that GitHub user, hey, log back in, you should be good now. So log out, log in, and let me do all of this again. Passwords in, sign in, two-factor authentication. And there we go, we've logged in. So let me just zoom in again. And now if we go into the Servo environment, we should now actually see a namespace. Now, you might notice every time I click into Servo, it takes a little time to load. Now remember, this cluster is in New York, okay? So there's going to be a bit of latency to connect to it, but it's still relatively quick. So what we're going to do is we're going to click into the namespaces. Now you see there's one. There is a namespace now. So if we click namespaces, bam, default. So now you can get an idea on how we can, going by the whole rule of least privilege, so you're just making sure people have just enough access for what they need and nothing more. This is how you can sort that out. So you just give the user access to specifically what they need. So we've confirmed that is all good. So back to the documentation. And so we've confirmed, yes, our user can see the Servo default namespace. Great. Now, GitOps. We're getting into some real exciting stuff now. So let's go down. And it's saying here, so what we're going to do in this one, we're going to set up a pipeline to deploy an application, okay? So as the GitHub user, we're going to manage the MicroK8s cluster, okay? We're going to create a namespace to deploy the app within, and then we're going to set a quota, okay? Because we've disabled that before, so we're going to set a bit of a quota for this namespace, okay? So let's go into our Portainer environment, the MicroK8s cluster, and we'll create a new namespace called Demo App. Great, so let's get out of this and let's go into our MicroK8s. And then we're going to go namespaces, add with form. Do you see this one at the top? We'll give it a name. So Demo App. So Demo App is the name. Now, we're not going to have unlimited. We're going to have to set some resource quotas here. Let's just go 4 for that one. We'll give it 2 for the CPU limit. And there we go. So we're happy with that. So the name, Demo App. Set a resource limits of memory and the CPU, perfect, and now we can create the namespace. Perfect, there we go. So we see that this namespace has a quota enabled. Right, so the next step of this one, so we're going to now deploy the app. So in the apps page, we're going to create a new app from a manifest. We're going to choose a Git repo. Now this is in GitHub. For myself, and then we're going to add the example app manifest and the additional paths, okay? So the image on the right hand side here gives us a really good idea on what we're supposed to be doing. So the namespace, we're going to be using Demo App. The name, we're just going to call it Demo App as well. I'm going to walk through all of this as well. And then we're going to put the repository URL where our manifest lives. And then we're going to tell it what YAML files we're also going to need by using additional paths. So let's set that up. So we're in the K8s Made Easy cluster, which is my MicroK8s, and we're going to go to applications. And we're going to go create from manifests. So click that, and here we are here. So the namespace we can see, we're going to make sure that that's Demo App. The name, we'll also call it Demo App. I don't want a space. And now it's asking for the repository. So I'm going to put in my repository here. So let me quickly go grab that. So that is my GitHub URL where my manifest and everything lives. Now you can see it's asking for the path of the manifest. So you'll see what happens here. As soon as I type Kube, you see it now it's going, cool, I can see what's in there. And now what we can choose is the first one for the actual manifest path itself is going to be our deployment YAML. So we'll click that. But we've got a few other configurations that we've got for our deployment, right, that are specified in other YAML files. So what we're going to do is click Add File, and we're going to let Portainer know for this deployment about the other files that we want to have part of this deployment, okay? So the first one is the config map. So what I'm going to do to make my life a little easier is to copy this and go like that. And so config map.yaml, that's the first one. Add a file for the next one. And the second one is ingress. So ingress.yaml. Add another file. And this one is secret. Oh, paste that in. Secret.yaml. And the last one is service.yaml. Great, so let's just double check. So I'm just checking against the documentation. So config mac.yaml is correct. We've got ingress, we've got secret, and we have service. Great, we're all good there. Now, the documentation also says to enable GitOps updates. So we're going to do that. And we're going to change the fetch interval to 1 minute. Okay. So just to recap, I've added my GitHub link to where the manifest lives. Now they're actually inside of a Kube folder. So we're telling Portainer that, hey, look, within the Kube folder, within multi, there'll be a deployment YAML file. And that's also the same for the other additional paths. You'll find some other files that we want to use for this deployment. And that's where they've been defined there. We've then said, hey, look, we would like the GitOps update so that whenever a change is made to any of the files, Portainer's going to pick that up and deploy that change for us, and it'll be reflected here. Okay, and the Portainer's going to go on every minute for that poll. Okay, and we're happy with that, so we can hit deploy. And there we go. We can see that deployment has gone. So now if we change the namespace to demo app, we can see we now have our demo app. But what's happened? There's a little red status here, and it seems that our service has not been deployed. Okay, you can see here that, hey, failed to create application. Pods Portainer Demo deployment is forbidden. Failed quota, right? You must specify limits for the CPU and for memory. Remember, this namespace has a quota. So everything deployed in here has to have those limits specified when in the deployment, okay? So let's go back to our documentation and see how we can go about fixing this. So let's just confirm this. So again, we've gone into the apps page, we've chosen our Git repo, we've added the manifests, and we've enabled the GitOps updates, and we've set the loop to 1 minute, and we've deployed it, okay? And now it's saying here, see the app failed to deploy and why. Now let's fix it. So we've explained why it's failed, but now we can add a fix to fix it. So you can see here on the right hand side here that there's actually a little snippet of how we go about fixing this. And that's by adding the resources with the limits, right? So we're saying, hey, look, when it comes to memory and CPU, these are the limits because we need to specify them to meet our conditions. So now what we can do is if I go to my GitHub and we'll make a change to the code itself. So here we are in my GitHub. So now if I go into Kube, just wait for that, and go into multi. So that was the paths that you would be familiar with that we're just using. Now in our deployment, if we scroll down, we're not setting any limits or anything like that, right? We need to specify that in here. So if I actually go back one, we can see there's a limits file here. And this actually has what we need to add to our manifest to meet that condition so our application can be deployed. So if I copy this, right, and go into the deployment, yes, I'm going to make a change right here in GitHub. So if we click edit this file, and I'm going to scroll down to the bottom, right, make a new line. We're going to paste. We'll paste that in. So now we've got resources, requests, And now we're setting those limits, okay? So now we should be able to, our application should be happy with us now. So if I actually save this and commit this change, we should be good to go. So I'm going to commit changes, update deployment YAML, yep, commit that change. Great. So let's just go back to our documentation. So we've added it, and now it's saying, hey, look, the app is now running after our changes were merged. So let's actually go back and confirm that. So going back to our Portainer environment. So this is our application here, right? We've got to wait for that poll though. So let's give it a refresh. We'll just wait for Portainer to reach out, notice that change, and redeploy the application. So we'll just give it a few refreshes and just wait for that to come through. So I've just hit refresh again. That error's gone away. That's awesome. So we can see that it's also replicated 1 of 1. So if we go back to applications, bam, we've got a green status. So what's happened there is that since we set up those GitOps updates, Portainer's gone and checked, hey look, there's been a change, let's run that, and now our change will successfully meet the conditions, which was then allowed that application to be deployed. So our cluster's happy, Portainer's happy, our code is happy. Great. So again, we can confirm that yes, our application is all happy, running, replicated, 1 of 1, everything is good. So pipeline detail. So it's saying here, click edit at, and you'll see the details of your pipeline config, including the running version. So if we go into applications and into our deployment and then click edit, we should see this. So here's our application, click there. Now, if we scroll down and go edit this application, you can see here that at the very top here, the current version deployed is 3D92342. So that's our commit, right? So if I go to here, what's that? Matches. So it's saying, hey, look, we're running off of this commit version. I can compare that to what's in my GitHub, which is my source of truth. We can confirm that that matches. That's fantastic. Great, and that's what matches here as well. So let's scroll down. Now we're onto the API proxy. So let's just do a bit of a recap. So what we've just done is we've gone through, we deployed our Servo, we deployed and configured our MicroK8s, we've managed all the access, and then we've gone through and deployed an application using GitOps, right? And there was an issue because our application didn't actually meet the conditions of our cluster that we had set on that namespace, okay, that we deployed to. We tidied up our code. Portainer knows to poll every minute, reached out, said, oh, there's a new commit, ran that new change. That satisfied the conditions on our cluster. The application deployed successfully. So that is fantastic, and that's what we've just covered. So now we're on to API proxy. So let's see what we're going to do here. So it's saying generate and use your kube config file. The Portainer homepage, as the GitHub user account, click on kube config in the top navigation. Okay, so in the home where we'll see that. Then we're going to select both clusters and we're going to download the config file. Okay, and then we're going to put this in our kube directory, right? So there's two ways that we can do it. We can use OpenLens or kubectl. Now I have kubectl on my machine, so that's what I'm going to use. So let's go ahead and download that kube config file. So coming to home, you'll see kube config. Let's click that. And these are the two that I want to download, right? So it's saying here, select the Kubernetes environments to add to the kube config file. You may select across multiple pages. The kube config file will not expire. Great, download that file, please. I'm going to allow that. Right, so I've just downloaded that. And so what I need to do now is actually add that file to my .kube directory so we can actually use this config. So let me go ahead and get that sorted. So we've just downloaded that kube config file. So now what we can actually do, if I just do an ls and I find where it downloaded to, So if I do an ls in here, we can see that's where it ended up. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move that file and I'm going to just name it config, no extension or anything like that, and put it into this .kube directory that I'm in. Okay, so, and if you're on Mac or anything like that, I'll just do a print working directory so you can kind of see where I'm in. So I'm in .kube, okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to grab that. We're going to go move, grab that, and in this directory, we're just going to call you config, right? Now if I do an ls, we now have that config all in here. So now if I do an nvim config, we can see the configuration from that YAML file is now all in here, ready to be used. So I'll just quit out of here, clear that up a bit. And now let's jump back to our documentation to see what's next. But just to quickly explain again, so we downloaded that YAML file. It would have just saved maybe in your downloads folder or something like that. We've renamed it. Okay, now .kube is a hidden folder by default, so I had to, I've just done it via the terminal, but if you're going to go via the a user interface on whatever machine you're on, it will be a hidden directory, so you have to enable that. You'll see the .kube, we've renamed it to just config with no extension, and we've put it into this directory. Okay, so that's where we're at. Great, so we've done that, okay? So based off some of the images here, what you can see is we should be able to do a kubectl config get context, and we should actually see our clusters. So let's give that a shot. So kubectl config get context. Enter, and there we go. By putting that config in there, we've told our kubectl that, hey look, these are the environment. So we confirm that we can actually interact with these, okay? And remember that I'm on my MacBook. My MacBook isn't running any of these things. We've just given it access by adding that YAML file in there, the configuration file in there. So now we can interact with these. But let's just go back to the documentation and see what's next. So we've confirmed that yes, if running, if I zoom in a bit so you can see what I'm looking at, the kubectl config get context, that showed us what we wanted to see. Great, and confirming we downloaded the kube config and put it all in there. So, also we can do a kubectl get nodes, and we should see our nodes as well. So let's give that a go. So kubectl get nodes, bam, there's our nodes as well. How awesome is that? Right, so we've just confirmed that yes, we can interact with all of our clusters and all of that good stuff. And we can see the context between Civo and MicroK8s, but now we want to be able to test our access, right? Can we create a namespace in the Civo environment where we actually only have limited access? Let's give it a go. So in here we can do kubectl, and then we can go create namespace test, and we'll give it some context to know where we're wanting to be to deploy it to. I actually can't remember it, so let's actually get the contexts first. So get context, that tells us our one there, so we can copy that name. Fantastic, copy you, and now let's do kubectl create namespace test and context here. Enter, bam. We can't create it because our user cannot create resources in the namespace because we don't have the permissions. So there we go. We've just confirmed that yes, our RBAC and all the controls that we've set in place do not work. Everything that was set in place, they're working and in place, and are limiting our user from being able to do anything extra. So there we go, we've confirmed, yes, this is true and working. And there we go. You've just discovered Kubernetes the easy way using Portainer. And again, as it just says here, this is just the tip of the iceberg of what Portainer can do. I hope you enjoyed following along. I personally enjoyed doing this and playing around with MicroK8s, and it just goes to show you how easy it is to manage deployments, existing deployments, your clusters, making changes, managing access, add-ons, all of that stuff, and even deploying and managing clusters that aren't even in your local environment. I hope you enjoyed this. Thank you so much for following along and have a great one. Goodbye.